Welcome back to the Morning Run. You're here with Lin Mark, Kusu Chuang and Sharitz Abdullah. The Chinese yuan has also been depreciating and China may soon have to resort to dumping its treasuries. Of course, this is all happening against the backdrop of US-China trade tensions. So the offshore yuan has slumped 2.4% this month, reaching the weakest since December.
China has 1.13 trillion US dollars in American treasuries, a fraction of the total $22 trillion in US debt. So for every $22 trillion in US debt outstanding, China has over one of them. And that's a lot for one country to hold. So they've got a lot of firepower. And I think they're trying to use this to basically arrest the yuan's decline.
Now, China also does have a history of selling treasuries to support the yuan. So in 2016, they unloaded about $188 billion of treasuries as the yuan sank almost 7% amid capital flight. So for more on China and the yuan, we have on the line with us Han Tan, market analyst at FXTM and quite a familiar voice here on BFM. Han, thanks for joining us. What is the reason behind China for offloading its treasury notes and what can they gain from this?
Well, the idea for Chinese policymakers to offload their holdings of U.S. treasuries is to primarily try and prop up or defend the Chinese yuan. However, it's not that simple of a relationship there. Now, we do note the latest data from the U.S. Treasury. There was this slight reduction in March. Keeping in mind this data was from a couple of months ago. We'll certainly be paying attention to this week's data to see if there's a substantial decline in the Fed's custody holdings. In other words, what the Fed holds on behalf of other central banks. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that. But broadly speaking, if you are, say, referring to wide-scale selling of U.S. Treasuries by China, we see that as a tail risk. We don't think that's likely at this point in time because keeping in mind that the weaker yuan is helping China to offset the effects of the recently heightened and broadened U.S. tariffs on Chinese exports. So there's a hierarchy of objectives there, and there's not necessarily a clear-cut net positive outcome if China were to do so in an outsized manner.
Now, Han, with regards to the currency, what do you think the Chinese policymakers' tolerance range is with regards to the yuan against the USD?
Yeah, look, I think broadly speaking, policymakers in China, they are likely to be more tolerant of more yuan weakness over the near term. Again, because the currency acts as this pressure valve, right, whereby a weaker yuan can help offset the effects of, again, those U.S. tariffs on Chinese exports. In other words, that weaker currency is going to help China retain its competitiveness in the global markets. Also, you got to keep in mind that Chinese government officials in recent years, they have repeatedly said that they're not going to engage in competitive devaluation. They're going to allow markets to have more of a say on the yuan. So they want to be seen as adhering to that stance as well. So to be more specific in terms of the tolerance range, look, I think the yuan has to get a lot closer to that 7 mark against the US dollar. And looking at the charts, that 7 number, that's been a strong resistance line in recent years. So if we head north of 6.9 from where we are right now, get closer to that 7, I think that's when we could perhaps see policymakers become less tolerant of that weaker yuan.
Yeah, Han, if the yuan continues to depreciate, which ASEAN currency will depreciate most along with it in tandem?
Right. Chuang, to be honest, it's not that straightforward of a correlation because, look, there are a range of factors that are influencing the performance of ASEAN currencies, from domestic political uncertainties. We have seen elections come and go for regional economies. Then also you got to factor in external events, right, such as the global growth outlook, resilience of the US dollar, broader risk sentiment, etc. But, just to try and help us understand the somewhat loose correlation between the yuan and some ASEAN currencies. So if we look at, say, what's called the coefficients of correlation, historically, over the past 2 years, the Singapore dollar has the highest correlation with the offshore yuan, with the latter accounting for about 40+% of the moves in the Singapore dollar over the past 2 years. But if you look at recent history, it's the Thai baht over the last 2 weeks that has strengthened the most, both against the US dollar and also the yuan. So again, there are a whole host of factors at play here. I think broadly speaking, when we look at US-China trade tensions, I'll be keeping an eye on economies that are open, that are trade dependent. So economies like Singapore and Malaysia come to mind. But keep in mind, should these trade tensions escalate, that's going to weigh not just on the broader Asian context, but also on the EM, the emerging markets universe as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. And that was Han Tan of FXTM, spotlighting very broadly, the Singapore dollar and the Thai baht. But he's also going to be taking a look at open and trade-dependent economies like ours.